you to Thinking Aloud. It is my pleasure to welcome Lee Schwartz to the program. Lee Schwartz spent the first 5 years of his life on a chicken farm. The best opening sentence to any bio that I've read so far on the program. At 5, he and his family moved to Santa Rosa, a small Northern California bedroom community about an hour north of San Francisco, where he spent his youth until heading to the big city of Los Angeles to attend UCLA. When first enrolled, the daytime campus had a greater population than the entire city of Santa Rosa. Lee's athletic career began early on. He first laced up his baseball cleats around 7 or 8 years old. That lasted through high school. Hoops began in 6th grade, continuing through high school as well. Being the tallest on the court, and for that matter in his school, during the period from 6th to 9th grade, Lee had visions of continued growth and opportunities beyond high school. Then reality set in. His growth plate shut down. He was suddenly looking up to fellow teammates. His dreams were dashed. In May of his freshman year at UCLA, Lee met the love of his life, indirectly so on a softball field. Lee and Olivia dated exclusively through their time at UCLA. In September of 1977, they tied the knot, both wanting to establish a professional career. Creating a family was for the future. In 1986, their first mutant-sized child was born. Geoffrey popped out of the womb at 95% for height and weight. 3 years later, Mitchell followed suit. They both began their athletic journeys sooner than their dad. T-ball at 5, hoops for Geoffrey at 7 or 8. Lee wasn't about to watch from the sidelines. From T-ball through junior division of Little League, Lee coached both boys. There were even seasons when he coached both at the same time. He also paced the basketball court sidelines, coaching Geoffrey in city recreational leagues. Unlike their father, the boys continued to grow and grow. By the time they reached high school, they were already huge, and thus began football careers that spanned college and 8+ years respectively professionally. All the while, Lee continued his softball and hoops activities in city and rec leagues while living vicariously through Geoffrey and Mitchell, including attending high school practices and games, traveling to almost every collegiate game they played in, and being in the stands for dozens of NFL contests. Raising Giants is Lee's accounting of his incredible, extraordinary journey with his 2 outstanding sons, who blended outstanding athletic ability, mutant size, and top-drawer intelligence to succeed on the gridiron as well as on this earth as outstanding human beings. I have to confess, I've had the pleasure and the honor of being Lee and Olivia's rabbi at my previous pulpit at Adat Shalom. Wonderful, wonderful years. I had the opportunity to get to know wonderful, wonderful people, and this Schwartz wonderful, wonderful family. And so it's my honor and my pleasure to welcome Lee to Thinking Aloud. Lee, kol hakavod on writing the book, Raising Giants.
Thank you. Thank you for that nice introduction. Appreciate it.
You're very, very welcome and well-deserved. So let me ask you, I feel like I must have been one of the first people who had an inclination that this book was coming, because we were at one of our coffees where I drink coffee and you drink water. I started to talk to you about what kind of things you've learned from raising 2 NFL sons. And for the Valley Beth Shalom congregation, for anybody who's come to my office, there's a football here in my office that's signed with 2 autographs, and it's the Schwartz brothers, and they signed it at the promotional event for Eat My Schwartz, their great book written by Geoff and Mitch. If Livy's written a book, I'll promote that book as well. So
you would appreciate that.
Today we're going to focus on raising giants. All right. So just for people who don't know, the first 2 Jewish brothers who ever played against each other in the NFL are year 2 sons, and they each had their own individual journeys to get to the NFL. And now they've written a book. Geoffrey is in media. We listen to his podcast all throughout the season. I listen to it with my son, and Mitchell is kind of a foundational figure in modern day Chiefs lore. He's found a home in Kansas City. What was the genesis of writing this book, Raising Giants?
Well, first, let me just clarify something, because if they had actually played against each other, I might have survived it. Their teams played against each other, but they're both offensive linemen. So fortunately, they were not opposing each other. There have been instances of that. Howie Long has had his kids on opposite sides of each other, as I understand it, and that would have been disastrous. So it worked out very well that they were on different sides of the ball. Or the same side of the ball.
They were in the same game. Playing
they were
against
the same game, yes.
They never
extraordinary experience, but yeah.
Right.
The genesis was, I always thought it was an interesting story what they had gone through. And look, they're not the only brothers to have ever played. Actually, Livy did some research at some point, and there are more brothers playing than one would maybe believe to be the case. But the original intent to write the book was, I wanted my grandkids to better understand what their dad and uncle did. Because at least Geoffrey's kids were born while he played. Alex was born while he played, but too young to understand. So I thought to myself, boy, this would be great to write something that they could read about and better understand the lives of their dads, and ultimately, Mitchell with Brooke now, and I mean, Mitchell and Brooke now have Scotty. So they would all better understand what their parents and uncles went through. And then it started to expand from there. As I believe you're a part of, I have this fan club broadcast list that I've been broadcasting news to for years about the boys. And it gives snippets of what's going on, but not the whole story. And so I thought, well, this would then fill in the gaps with that. So that's how it began. And then as I started to write it, I realized that there are lessons to be learned if somebody's open to it about my experience and how it might apply to their experience. Like parents who have high school athletes that aspire to be college or professional athletes. Well, what's the path? What might that look like? What are the pitfalls? What are the things you have to watch for? And so that just continued to lead to ultimately getting the book published.
Well, there are sections that are fascinating throughout the book, like you rank some of your favorite football experiences with the boys, and I was somewhat surprised to see that the Super Bowl was number 2. So I'll let everybody read the book for themselves to figure out what was number 1. I thought for sure that Mitchell in the Super Bowl would be number 1.
I should say to you though, I didn't put those in priority.
That's right. There's no number, but there's
no numbers to it. It just happened to because Geoffrey's came, first.
So I want to talk, let's hone in on that aspect of the book, because I think that's actually the part of the book that should appeal to most ordinary people. And that is that a lot of us in LA, in this area, have kids who play sports, and we employ way too many personal coaches at this point and all kinds of, nonsense. I was explaining when I played baseball, and I played baseball into freshman year of high school and pony league and all that stuff. Each team carried 2 bats, right? And now each player carries 2 bats.
Correct.
And so the game has evolved, the investment has evolved, everything has evolved. So you travel to a Cooperstown tournament, and kids are bringing all kinds of, entourage of personal coaches with them. And this is in their early teens. This isn't even yet, late in high school. This is early teens. Mm-hmm. So there is on page 29 in the book, you write a 7-part playbook. I
highlighted that page. Yep.
I thought this was one of the most important pages of the book, a 7-part playbook from your firsthand experiences. You write, nevertheless, here's my 7-part playbook formed from firsthand experience, which I firmly believe could universally and fundamentally help parents and their aspiring athletes better navigate their way through the challenges that everyone is sure to face. And it's education is first. Allow your children to play any and all sports. Be realistic. Seek outside counsel. Create balance in your children's lives. Make sure kids are having fun. It's not about you. All right. So I thought those were like, if there are 10 commandments for Western civilization, for the Jewish tradition, then this certainly is like the 7 commandments for what it is to be the parent of a kid who's playing sports. Where do you see most parents make the wrong turn? If this is where we're supposed to aspire to follow these kinds of rules, what's the trap that you see most parents falling into?
The trap is the unrealistic belief that all kids have this opportunity to become successful athletically in college and professional, and the numbers just don't support it. I understand why, but I also think that parents look through the lens of themselves as opposed to the reality of their children. And then they push it forward because that's what they had wanted and maybe didn't succeed at it. And so there's not a realistic evaluation of what takes place. And I talk in the book of several instances where parents held back their child so that they could be, older than the others and hopefully succeed to ultimately wash out of the sport because they just weren't physically capable of getting to that level. So there's some real reality that has to take place that parents, in my opinion, need to really evaluate very early on. I've known of too many instances where parents have gotten coaches involved at a real young age, and the kids get bored, or they hurt themselves because they use their arm too much. One kid I know blew up his elbow because he just pitched too much in high school and never was able to achieve much beyond that. So I think it's up to the parents to have a realistic appraisal. And that's why I went to outside people. I didn't do it myself. I didn't say, Geoffrey and Mitchell are going to be the best players possible. I took input from those that knew and then evaluated accordingly.
I want to talk about the best pieces of advice that you received or that Geoffrey received. And there was a line that really resonated with me. Yep. It's from Coach Blatt at Pali High School. Right. Okay? And our hearts go out to Pali High School, of course. Yeah. What's happened to the high school as a result of the fires. And Coach Blatt used to tell him, don't lie to yourself. Mm-hmm. Now, what's funny is a lot of these pieces of advice that they receive from coaches that they think influence their careers, any of us could use in our lives. It's not just about football. It's not just about sports. And that's ultimately the power of sports, is that, being an athlete is supposed to actually improve the rest of your life. It's supposed to give you the tools to navigate and to meet the challenges of anything that you deal with because you've had this experience. How did Coach Blatt in particular, I'm sure that tons of coaches gave great deal of advice to both boys. And this line keeps coming back again and again and again in the book, don't lie to yourself. How do you think they both used that throughout their lives, throughout their careers? And how do you think that ordinary people should use that in their lives?
Well, Geoffrey was the only one who played under Coach Blatt. Mitchell had different coaches. And it's resonated with Geoffrey. He uses it all the time. He refers back to it all the time. Very fortunately, he is one who's just very honest about himself and who he is and what he is. That's why he always jokes, even though he now has a media presence, primarily on radio, his joke is, I have a face for radio. And he's always talking about that. And so as you share, that's applicable not just to sports, to everyday life, is just be honest with who you are, what you can accomplish. It's fine to have goals that may even exceed what you're capable of. But at the end of the day, one must recognize that there's a certain limitation and needs to be accepting of that and work accordingly.
There was a lot of talk of their collegiate careers, in Oregon and Cal. There's a lot of throwing shade at USC that I noticed throughout the book. I heard your UCLA.
Unashamedly.
So I know you, and I was expecting it as I began to read the book. But I want to talk about the Super Bowl experience just for a minute, just because so few people get to experience that moment the way that you and Olivia did. And so few people appreciate that moment the way that you do as a result of an entire lifetime of watching the sacrifice that it takes to get yourself into that position. So the Super Bowl occurs in Miami for that game.
And as you might remember, it was Super Bowl LIV.
LIV, right.
It's the three letters that form Livy's first name, Livy.
When Mitchell goes to the Super Bowl, you get a phone call that you have 2 tickets, or you requested. Explain the whole experience about getting tickets, about going to the Super Bowl, all of that.
Well, when we were watching the game before the Super Bowl, and it was apparent that Kansas City was going to win and was going to the Super Bowl. And of course, Livy and I are jumping up and down in our room here, the room we call, or it is called the bonus room, with the 2 big screen TVs and all that. And we were just thrilled. We knew we were now going to a Super Bowl. And after that, we had conversation with Mitchell about all the logistics. How do you get tickets? How do you get to Miami? And so on. And so he was kind enough to say to us, there will be 2 tickets waiting for you when you get to Miami. And frankly, that wasn't an inexpensive proposition.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many of the listeners here have an understanding of how much Super Bowl tickets are face value.
Right.
The face value of that ticket was $3,300.
Right. And they go, and if you buy one, on the market, it's often, much more.
The aftermarket is probably sometimes close to $10,000. So we knew we had tickets. Now, how do we get there? Because, it was late in the game, shall we say. Most hotels were already booked because people do this well in advance, knowing they're going to a Super Bowl. And so Miami is not terribly far. Well, it's not close, but it's close enough to Charlotte. So our thinking was, we'll book a flight to Charlotte, be able to see our grandkids, then drive down to Miami, and then spend the weekend there and then go back to Charlotte. Well, that's what we did. But as it turns out, Mitchell was able to get us into the team hotel.
Oh, wow. So all the Chiefs, all the family and everybody stays in kind of the same hotel for the Kansas City.
They stayed at a Marriott hotel in the area there, top shelf hotel. They do it right. I mean, we got there and there are the Chiefs walking around in the lobby, all kinds of activities. They had a room set aside just for the family to go in and get all the munchies you might want. They provide busing to the game and take you home after the game. So that was the logistics of the weekend. We drove from Charlotte. It turned out to be a 10+ hour drive. Ended up at the hotel that night, spent the weekend at the hotel, went to the game on Sunday, and then we drove back Monday to Charlotte.
And the Chiefs have a reputation for doing it right and for being a family focused organization, right? I have no doubt that if it was the Bears, everybody would have gotten like a coupon to Subway and been wished the best of luck in terms of how you get to the stadium. When you're with the Chiefs organization and during that weekend, as parents, are you trying to see Mitchell? Are you trying to stay out of his way? Are you trying to be there when he wants to see you, that you're available? Or the latter?
Yeah, we knew we needed to give him space. So we didn't see much of him that weekend. And we saw Brooke during the weekend because she was accessible, but Mitchell still had practice and other obligations that he had. And we knew that, knowing Mitchell as he is, he was going to be supremely focused on the game. And any distraction for him would not have been good for him.
Now he's part of that famous fraternity of Pat Mahomes and Kelsey and all those guys.
Yes,
that like to hang out, and that bromance, that Kansas City bromance that happens there. That team, did it feel as close knit when you were in the hotel? Does it feel as close knit as it's portrayed on TV?
Yes, they are very close knit. They had each other's backs. They were all in it together. And I mean, I know the relationship Mitchell had with, let's say, Patrick and Travis, and they were very close. And look, Mitchell was Patrick's right tackle and his protector. And Mitchell took that very seriously. So yeah, that was all there. And the Chiefs are top shelf. And I was actually able to meet Clark Hunt, who's the owner of the Chiefs, at the party after the game. Mm-hmm. There was a huge ballroom at the hotel that was set aside for a party. And I was walking the hallway and there was Clark Hunt. And I thought to myself, I got nothing to lose. So I walked up and said, "Excuse me, I'm Mitchell Schwartz's dad." And he spent about 10 minutes talking to me. And I shared how much I really appreciated all that the organization had done for Mitchell and for the parents there that night. It was just an extraordinary event that night.
What does it feel like as parents? So few parents get to the pinnacle of sports. You watched how many high school games, college games, beginning of an NFL career on shakier ground, let's say. Then you get to the Super Bowl, and at a certain point you realize this is going to happen. He's going to get a Super Bowl ring. What does that feeling feel like for parents sitting in the stands, knowing that your son's going to get a Super Bowl ring?
The word I used consistently in the book was surreal. Yeah. It's like, how's this happening to us, to him? And we would pinch ourselves and look at each other and say, "Are we really doing this?" So yeah, it was very surreal the whole time. And then for me, probably, as you used the word pinnacle of the whole experience was that opportunity I wrote about somebody looking after me, and got me onto the field after the game, which wasn't anticipated, and was able to meet up with Mitchell. And there's a picture in the book of Mitchell and I holding the Lombardi Trophy, the legitimate Lombardi Trophy, which is emblematic of the champion of the Super Bowl. That picture, I don't need to look at it because it's emblazoned in my mind of that. That was just the pinnacle.
Mitchell has this path, and in many ways, it's clear in the book, as the second son, you've learned things. The whole family has learned things almost about the process. He has an easier path through this whole process.
Correct.
Geoffrey has a very different path. We'll go back to the first son now. Geoffrey has a very different path, and part of the oldest child club, and I'm a part of it, right? You have to make your way not only for yourself, but your entire family, because nobody knows, it's uncharted in terms of college, careers, all of this. And he travels to several teams throughout his career, plays for several different organizations. But I would think that the pinnacle of his career is happening right now, almost. I think he's probably the best known for what he's doing right now in media. And correct me if I'm wrong. I think that's my perception, unless I'm wrong.
I would say he's very well known, but not the best known. But yes, his career was different than Mitchell's, and he had to persevere through, I think, 10 injuries during the course of time, and some very severe, where Mitchell, knock wood, didn't have that and had that final injury with his back that ended his career. But Geoffrey had a lot of fortitude and wouldn't allow those obstacles to get in his way. And time after time, he had coaches who doubted him. And I wrote a chapter about that called The Society of Doubters, who coaches freely said, "You're not going to make it." And he kept a list. And that was used as encouragement. And now in media, he has done extraordinarily well. And all the more so when one recognizes that he was a stutterer as a child. And we had to take him to counseling and to a therapist to try to overcome that. And it was right before his bar mitzvah, actually. And if one remembers the movie The King's Speech, where there's a scene in there where, the King of England has to make a speech and he's a stutterer. And his therapist puts him through a regimen of detailing when to pause and how to say it. And Geoffrey saw that movie and said to us afterwards, "That was me. That's what my therapist had me to do." So the fact that he could be on national radio, TV, after being such a stutterer, where the therapist said, "We may never be able to repair this because he's come to me too late," I think is extraordinary.
Right. And now he makes a living speaking to millions of people about the NFL season.
Exactly.
I think that something that's compelling about the book, and again, Lee, correct me if I'm wrong, we're both kids Hall of Fame pitchers, or were they quarterbacks? I think it becomes assumed that these are kind of natural gift positions. These are positions where kids are just born into being able to do something freakish like that. They represent, and they continued. Geoffrey continues to analyze offensive line play. They're both offensive linemen, and it's a position that requires a lot of natural talent, of course, but it's also a position with a lot of craft that can be taught and that can be learned, and technique, and so. A lot of hard work and dedication and devotion went into that, into becoming offensive linemen. And you talk about Mitchell playing quarterback for one down in high school or something like that in the book. I remember. I didn't mark the page.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's a funny story because I've met them both. That to think of him playing quarterback, I just imagine the jersey of like a number 1 or a quarterback number on the jersey doesn't seem right. There's something compelling about them being offensive linemen. And there's something compelling about that, about the totality of their story as offensive linemen, because I think it encourages people to understand that through a great deal of hard work and through focusing in on what you're good for and the way that you can help a team, it really inspires, not only in sports, but inspires us in life to maybe play our role and play our role to the fullest.
Yeah, they had to play a role because of their size. They were just destined, if they were to play football, to be offensive linemen. At 6'6" and 6'5.5" and 340 and 320-ish or so, they were destined to do that. And so they had to learn how to do that well, because as I said in the book, and I would say it to their faces, when you compare them against a lot of the other athletes, particularly today, maybe not as much back then, they're not genetically as athletic as some of their brethren were. So they had to do their job through learning how to do it better. And they were both real tacticians about how to handle their job. Geoffrey played guard more than tackle. And so, I think they refer to it as the telephone booth position, because you're in a confined space. And Geoffrey was known that if he got his paws on you, you weren't going anywhere. That's how big and strong he was. Could he get outside and lead a sweep? You don't expect Geoffrey to do that. But open up a hole in the middle of the offensive line? Yeah. Mitchell, on the other hand, was on that end as a tackle and was exposed and had to go up against some of the best that have ever played. And they will be Hall of Famers, the guys that he's gone up against consistently. But he figured out ways to counter their moves and to be the best he could be, and practiced them over and over and over again, to the point where he was that successful against these top level defensive ends.
Well, I want to just focus on the last chapter, the title of which and the message of which I think is really an important one. From Boys to Men, the building of character. Okay, it's not actually the last chapter. There's a couple more, but this is where I want to focus on the very end. So I'm going to turn to page 352, and I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs here. And throughout the book, what's great is that I hear your voice. It's all you coming through. As I write this book, I have two 30-something sons. Since I'm only in my 30s myself, I have no idea how that happened. But in all seriousness, I recognize and acknowledge that Livy and I are very fortunate parents. At any time during their formative years and into young adulthood, especially given the careers they both chose, it was possible for them to take the left fork in the road when the right was the appropriate decision. They always went right. Mitchell and Geoffrey have grown up to be outstanding people and citizens as a result of the lessons learned along the way. And I'm going to skip a couple paragraphs. What's great to see as parents is that Geoffrey and Mitchell live their lives ethically and morally. There are no two more important elements to one's character as far as Livy and I are concerned. We all have seen those who reach some level of fame, fortune, and or notoriety and then become a different person, having been changed by their newfound status. That hasn't been the case with Mitchell or Geoffrey. They are no different as people today than when they walked out the door headed for college life. That makes Livy and I supremely proud. As a dear friend of mine, John Peterson, offered an autobiographical piece. He recently wrote for his family, "If I have any advice now that I am in my 8th decade, it is simply that you should never stop learning. It is heartwarming to know that Mitchell and Geoffrey are such solid people who continue to learn, building upon their sound foundation." Now, this kind of brought the whole book into perspective for me. It is in many ways a book about two very successful football careers. It's also a book about the success of the family unit and the role that family unit plays over and over and over again in somebody's life if its foundation is strong. So in another part of the book that I can't remember where, you talk about how both boys go through free agency, coincidentally, in different parts of their career, right? At different moment, each one in their own career, but they both go through free agency at a time when they're at home in Los Angeles with you and Libby.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because that seems to be one of these moments where where both of them are teetering in terms of confidence, in terms of knowing what's going to happen in their career. It's not clear. For one, it of course results in a life-changing contract. For other, I think it results in life clarity. It feels like over and over again, the structure of your family and the idea that your family would be there for them no matter what, it comes through in the book. What is your message to parents who are raising high school and college kids today Forget about sports. Kids travel all over the country now, go to distant places. How should they try to be there for them? And how do you create a home where the kids know you can always go home at any stage of life and find advice and counsel at the kitchen table?
Well, I think that starts earlier on than when they start leaving the roost, right? I share in the book at a point where when they were really young, we used to send them on play dates. And the parents, when we go to pick them up, the parents would say, "Oh, Mitchell did great today. He helped, he did this, he did that." And we look at them and say, "You talking about our Mitchell?" Because as parents, there's no training as to how we do this, really. There's some classes you can take, and sometimes you never know what the outcome is going to be until it's too late. And so we had some ideas that we were doing some things right early on, but I think that's where it starts when they were very young, is creating an environment where there's conversation, where there's interaction. Now, I learned from my dad about the importance of being involved. He was a butcher. He had hours where days where he'd work from 11 to 8. And when he was done and I had a game or my brothers had a game, what did he do? He went to the field. He came to the court. Didn't care about dinner for him, didn't care about anything else. He was exhausted, but that's what he did. And that's where I picked it up and learned from. And I think that has come back in spades about being involved and showing them the love and the understanding and the involvement very early on, so that when it becomes later and they do get into positions like this, like you described, and those were coincidental. It wasn't purposeful. They just happened to be at the house when Geoffrey was free agent and signed with the Giants, and Mitchell free agent and signed with the Chiefs. But I think we were able to help them through the process because of the relationships we had with them, and that had been developed over the years. And I'm hopeful that they will do the same to their kids. And I see some of that already taking place with my two older grandchildren, and they're going to be 11 and 9 this summer, and they're already into sports and involved and just, wonderful grandchildren, but who's going to say otherwise as a grandparent? But I think it's now generation to generation. And we talk about that, right? Lador Vador, from generation to generation. I learned from my parents. My kids hopefully are learning from me, and hopefully my grandkids will learn from them.
Well, this book, Raising Giants, is a great story of how to be a dad that stewards your sons through this kind of terrain of sports, this kind of uneven terrain. But it's also a story that celebrates the foundation of family. That if you understand the underpinning, and if you know you and Olivia, and if you know Geoffrey and Mitchell, you understand that this is a family unit, that their success is emblematic of the family success, and the family success is reflective of their own achievements, and you have a lot to teach, and I'm grateful that you wrote the book, and I'm grateful that you gave me some time to talk about it. Thank you, Lee.
I appreciate you giving me the time to talk about it. Very much appreciate it.
All right. Well, best of luck, and
thank you.
And we look forward to the sequel, right? Raising Giants, the saga of a grandfather helping grandchildren. All right.
There you go. Aloud.
All right. Send my best to Olivia, and again, Mazel Tov on the book.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it. Thanks again, Rabbi.